Welcome back, everybody, to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, now rated by Disney or Lucasfilm, whichever way you slice it. Legends. I have a bit for you today. I don't really have much to talk about, but I have a lot for you today. Today we talk about Ewoks. Just Ewoks. It's the whole video, along with the next video dealing with the TV show of the same name. But I have a bunch of children's books, comics, all about Ewoks. So I hope you all join me for that. Starting with the Ewok Who Was Afraid. This is a children's book, mind you. Weechie, an Ewok, and his brother Willie enter a cave. And I'm going to be honest, I already forgot which one was terrified, but one of them was scared to go enter the cave because it was dark and there were scary noises. And they didn't feel brave, so they didn't go. But their brother goes ahead and ends up falling into a river going, or, like a little stream going in it, and needs help. And the other Ewok gathers the courage to go and rescue his brother. It's a children's story. Up next, we have Baby Ewok Picnic Surprise. I don't remember what happened, but that's chronologically what takes place next. 3 cheers for Kanisha. Kanisha is sick of always doing basket weaving. She knows that she can do stuff that men can do just as well. So she tries to do archery like the men, and she fails. And then she tries to do something else, and she fails. But she is determined to do something great. And so she does stuff, some of it by accident, some of it on purpose, and she succeeds in the end at showing that she can do stuff. And it's a children's book, so it's very short. That's one of the next ones. It's okay. I mean, it's a children's book. It's fine. Then we have the Ewoks Hang Gliding Adventure. The Ewoks use the hang gliders, and they get lost in the forest because they kind of got, confused. But they find their way back home. Then we have Wicked Goes Fishing. Wicked must take his younger sister to go fishing with him. But as he goes with his sister keeps messing everything up because she's a little child and he doesn't want her around. But he messes up his fishing trip. He goes back home upset and yells at his sister. His mother gets mad and tells him to go to his room. And the next day, he contemplates and thinks about his past, his life, where he looked up to the older kids, and they never wanted him around either, and he just wanted to help. And so with that realization, he realizes he's been too tough on his sister, and invites her to his next fishing trip. Children's story. After that, we have How the Ewoks Saved the Trees. Now, this one's actually pretty wordy. There are pictures in it, but it's primarily text. It's like they try to cram as much text in this children's book as possible. It's a pretty decent little children's book. Probably one of my favorites as compared to, the other stuff I just mentioned. And then we have The Adventures of Tebow, which is by Joe Johnson. Now you should go watch Matt Wolkin's video on the children's books. I'll leave a link in the description because he has some stuff to say about Joe Johnson, which you can go check out in the description. I'll leave a link to his video on it. But The Adventures of Tebow mainly deals with the Dulocks, the bad guys that are in the TV show, though they look vastly different in here, way more creepy. I mean, they're not like terrifying or anything. It's for kids, but they're drawn much more menacing. This book is also very wordy, just like the previous thing I talked about was, and is actually really good. I really enjoyed this one. But also, I don't know if you should read this to your kids. There's a specific portion of this book where they got like this thing that's bothering both the Ewoks and the Duloks. And so they're trying to like talk to each other to form like some sort of uneasy alliance. Until one of the older Ewoks notices that the Dulok has a fur coat on, and it's a fur coat of the Ewoks, and even says, "You're wearing our people's skin across your body," or something like that. It's a little less extreme, but he does say something like that. There's also another part where somebody falls off a cliff, and it says the wind gods pushed him off of his intended trajectory, which was going to land him in the water, but he went to the side and went splat on like a rock. Now remember, children are supposed to be reading this before bed, like elementary school kids. And there's some heavy metal stuff in here, considering this is meant for kids. But it was awesome. I mean, I'm glad it was there. Yeah, let's get, like, just like Matt Wilkins, let's get bloodier with the Ewoks. Come on now. That was my favorite Ewok story yet. But I mean, if you're an adult, you might genuinely enjoy that one. If you're, you might terrify your kids if you read them this. So I suggest not reading your kids this, but I suggest finding it yourself and reading the adventures with Tebow or of Tebow, because that was really fun actually. And then we get to the Ewoks '80s comics, which are based off of the cartoon. They're of course, not copying the episodes. It's new stuff, but it's made in the same vein. Issue 1. Rainbows. Kanisha gets sick, and Tebow and Wicked have to go save her. And they need to make a rainbow bridge to cross something. Also magic. Issue 2. Space pirates want Endor wood, and Kanisha's the one to save the day. That's that. Issue 3. People that already live on the planet want to steal the trees. Again, people really love the trees on this planet. It must be very valuable or expensive somewhere. Issue 4. Gravok, the evil Ewok. There was an Ewok who wanted to be more violent than the rest of the Ewoks. He wanted to become the apex predator of the planet instead of being a little tiny teddy bear. And so he goes off on his own, gets a bunch of lizard people to obey him, and he's now king of this part of Endor. And then he gets defeated. But here's also the weird thing. He has like a human face, but an Ewok body, and nobody dresses it. I thought he was faking being Ewok, but he's legitimately an Ewok that just turned evil. But he has a human face. Try to make sense of that. I don't know. I don't know. Issue 5. The trees again. This time somebody else from space comes down Ewok, or comes down to Endor and tries to steal the trees. Everybody wants these trees, man. Ewok. Issue 6. Ice Demon. Logray, who's the town chieftain. He's a medicine healer. He's got all this magic and stuff. Maybe he has some form of the Force. I mean, we can accept the Night Witches on Dathomir having a different form of the Force. I guess it's possible that the Ewoks have Logray. But the Ice Demon has superpowers, and Logray has to try to stop him. Let's see. Issue 7. The Crying Mountain. Oh, the big famous thing that all the EU haters use to show why the EU sucked. They use this one specifically. As, you see 30 plus years of canon, but this breaks it. Your stupid Ewoks comics from the 80s, you absolute baboon, you fool. Matt Wilkins has talked about it, and it came from Joe Bongiorno, who, if you don't know, is currently writing supernatural encounters, which should have originally come out, but then Disney bought the rights and everything. But then he's finishing up this story, which is going to basically explain all the weird stuff in Star Wars, like this. But Joe Bongiorno had told Matt Wilkins that when you read these Ewok comics, you got to remember that these Ewoks are a primitive species, right? Like if we were to go back, a couple hundred years even, or back all the way back to the caveman times, right? You got, if you were having an airplane like flying around that time, those people think that was like a monster or a dragon or something, because they'd have no way to comprehend that. And the same thing with also, we have tribes today in different parts of the world that still have had not interacted with civilization. If they saw an airplane or something flying by, they would think it was something else. So he says, when you read these comics, remember that these Ewoks are primitive. And so most likely, most of the stuff that we see in these comics is not how stuff is actually going down, but it is how the Ewoks perceive or cope with something that they cannot comprehend. So that's an explanation. It doesn't work perfectly, but it's a good way to kind of smooth over some of the rough patches of these comics. Because it was the 80s. You got to remember the cultural context of the 80s, right? We had the Droids cartoon, we had the Ewoks cartoon, we had these comics, we had the Droids comics. We had the old Marvel comics, that focused, around episode 4, after episode 4, in between episode 5 and 6. After episode 6, that's all we had. And we had Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the Brian De Leon solo trilogy, and the Lando trilogy, but that was about it. There was no real expanded universe yet, and the Heir to the Empire wouldn't come out till the 90s. Also, these comics are just written in the same vein as the TV show. Like, this is just more of the TV show. The TV show is also wacky like this. So if you don't like the TV show, you're not going to be won over by these comics. Anyway, moving forward. Issue 8. Racist Witch. There's a witch who wants to kill all the Ewoks. She doesn't succeed. Issue 9. There's a bunch of serpent people and a jerk serpent, and he has to be stopped. So Wicked and somebody else, I forget who, probably Tebow, go and stop him. Issue 10. We come back to what I talked about in our previous video, which is the Droids and Ewok crossover. In issue 10, we had the crossover finally. This is kind of weird. I don't know how to reconcile this, really. Perhaps somebody in the comments who's more knowledgeable, even though, in the EU than I am, can explain. Because in the Droids comic, when they go through the weird whole thing, C-3PO claims that they've jumped 100 years into the future or something like that, which would imply that all of the Ewoks TV show takes 100 years after the TV show, or 100 years after all of the expanded universe. Like, this would be after Legacy, like the comics with Cade Skywalker, and I don't think that's accurate. So I don't know how to reconcile that, really, but if you just ignore that, they just kind of traveled to Endor by accident, and actually, if you ignore that one part, but you accept the story, then we can explain why, also Matt Wilkins has talked about this, why the Ewoks worship C-3PO in episode 6, because R2-D2 and them show up, they go on one adventure together, then they go back up into the heavens and disappear until they come back in episode 6, and then we can be like, oh, they worship C-3PO because they've seen a shiny man before that, ascended into the heavens, I thought that was pretty cool when Matt Wilkins mentioned that. But the Droids and Ewoks crossover is okay. It's continuing off the plot thread of issue 4 in the Droids comics, and it's fine. It's probably my favorite issue of the entire Ewoks run, for what that's worth. But again, these are very 80s. These are very silly and wacky comics. And if you are not a fan of the TV shows, then you will not be a fan of these comics. I'm indifferent to the TV shows. There are some episodes I actually genuinely enjoy. There are other episodes, and so these comics were not really my cup of tea. But I still read them because they're not bad. They're just not what I'm looking for in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Anyway, then we have issue 11, where we have another case of somebody shrinking, because Kanisha gets shrunken down, and we meet a bunch of tiny people, and adventures ensue. Because this also happened in the Droids cartoon in the final episode, where they went through this mirror thing, and R2-D2 became a little small boy for a second. And in the Lando trilogy, in the first book, The Mind Up of Sharu, Vufi Ra gets turned into a little tiny person for a bit. So it was just this weird thing in the 80s of making people small. I don't know if the first Honey, I Shrunk the Kids came out in the 80s or something, but perhaps that's why this was a trend, because this happened in every single... I haven't seen this. I've read a lot of EU stories. There's been no shrinking involved. So far, every 80s material that I've come across for the Star Wars Expanded Universe has had shrinking. So I don't know what that's about. Issue 12. The witch, the racist witch, returns, and she tries to destroy the Ewoks again, by this time bringing back an ancient creature to kill them, because she can just resurrect them now. But that fails, and she runs away crying. Issue 13, a child Duloc must team up with a child Ewok to get out of predicament. There you go. And issue 14, Tebow is a leader for the day. He's chosen to be leader for the day because the true leader must go off on a mission. And these aliens show up on this very day, get all these orb things to mind control the Ewoks, and Tebow must save them from their plight. And so when the Elder returns as the leader, he sees everybody cheering Tebow on, and Logray's like, you might have a good replacement once you're gone, even though we already know in a previous issue he said that Kanisha would be taking his place as leader. So I don't know if that's a contradiction or what, but that was a little weird. But there's that. I also, for the life of me, could not find it. I freaking tried the UK comics revolving around... It's only 3 issues, focusing... 3 little stories focusing on the Ewoks from the UK. I will leave a link in the description to Matt's videos so you can at least know what they're about, but I had trouble finding them. Lastly, we have the Spanish comics, which I will also leave a link to StarWarsTimeline.net where you can actually read those. They're nothing big. They're all very short little adventures. But it's just a bunch of little short adventures, in the same art style, but, not written by Lucasfilm. And you've got, that witch lady coming back. You got the Dulocs as the bad guys. So a lot of things like that. It's nothing special, nothing you need. It's just there if you want it, and it's fine. So that's pretty much it, guys, for my talks about all the expanded universe material for Ewoks. The only things we have left is the Ewok TV show, which was 2 seasons long in the 80s, which I will talk about in the next video. And months and months and months down the line, I'll talk about the 2 Ewok films that were created. But overall, these children books, these comics, are these essential experiences for the Star Wars Expanded Universe? Absolutely not. You can skip all of this and be missing nothing. You never needed these comics to understand Episode 6 or anything like that. You're not going to be missing some integral part of the lore to the Star Wars Expanded Universe. These are for people who grew up in the 80s, watched the Ewoks cartoons and stuff, and wanted more of that, or watched the, Episode 6, saw the Ewoks, thought they were adorable, and wanted more of them. These are wacky, weird, silly adventures that are most definitely S-canon in terms of you can accept bits of it. Anything that contradicts anything else, just pluck that out and stuff like that. They're fun, though. I mean, like I said, they are very 80s. They're very silly. They're very weird. They're very out there. Because that's what the TV show is, and these comics are in the same vein. And for me, I was indifferent to it. I kind of kept checking the time. I was not having the best of time with it, but for those of you who grew up in the 80s, you might genuinely enjoy these comics. You might get a nostalgic twinge from the past by reading these, and that's fantastic if it does that for you. These were not my favorite things in the world, nor were they my worst things in the world. Like, they were just adequately average, what I would expect from the 80s. They're fine. They're not bad, though, by any means. They're just not personally what I'm looking for when I read Star Wars, But that being said, My favorite thing that I read about from the Ewoks so far was The Adventures of Tebow because of how dark it was, considering it was a children's book. But yeah, um, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope that you check these out regardless and form your own opinion. They are very silly though, but I think it's fun to at least check it out once, and it brings you back to those olden days of comics too, where things weren't taken so seriously. But yeah, there's a lot of wacky stuff in here. Up next, I have 2 seasons that I'll talk about the Ewoks TV show from the 80s. And then we move on to other things, like a couple Han Solo things, a couple comics, and then The Force Unleashed. So I hope you all join me for that. And until next time, guys, may the Force be with you. And don't let the Duloc get you. Hey, a lot later than night for me, so let me finish this off. Today we have the first 5 issues of the Droids comics that are based off the TV show. But of course, there's only 8 issues, and the last 3 are just a retelling of the movie, but of the first movie, episode 4, but from the Droids' perspective, so I won't be discussing that here. Overall, I think they're fun. If you were a big fan of the TV show in the 80s, or you just enjoyed them like I did, then you will have a pleasant time with this, though it is nothing essential to your understanding of the overall legend story. But they're fun little 80s tales, and they're drawn in that same art style as well. First one, R2D2 and C3PO are again in search of a new master. And in that first one, they go to his planet. There's this dictator with a robot that he uses to threaten everybody. And they find a robot that does a mech battle, basically. Second one brings back the bad guys from the first 4 episodes of the show. So I'm assuming they escaped Jabba, because Boba Fett had captured them, or Jabba's letting them work for him. Regardless, they're trying to grab some sort of laser weapon, because, you gotta have that. Issue 3, they're now trying to take care of this ambassador kid on some planet, and he's a really big fan of this pirate that he hears about on the Holo News. So he emulates him and wants to be just like him, only to find out that he's a jerk, essentially. And the droids help save him. And now, because of a big thing, we're going to skip to issue 5 and then move back to issue 4. So, in issue 5, C3PO and R2D2 finally get new masters, but not the same master, because one guy can't afford both R2D2 and C3PO, so they go their separate ways, until by the end of the story they reunite yet again. In issue 4, during the story, C3PO and R2D2 land in this place of nothingness. Now, if you watch Matt Wilkins' video, he'll talk about how he thinks it's like other space, or not other. Where is color? Yeah. And so that was an interesting take on it. Of course, it's from the 80s, so nobody knows. But they do end up finding the Force Moon of Endor, where they get to begin their crossover with the Ewoks, which, if you want a conclusion, you'd have to read the comics. You gotta remember, this was the dark time of Star Wars. This was, the late 80s. And until the Thrawn trilogy came out, Star Wars was dying. This was dying. That's why it only lasted 8 issues. Ewoks got a little bit more, but then again, the show got 2 seasons. But again, everybody was losing interest. But so these are relics of the past, and while I think they're a lot of fun, I can't recommend them unless you enjoy the TV show, or a big fan of it from like the 80s. But if you're somebody my age who wasn't around then, but you've seen it and liked it, then I say pick it up. If you've seen the 80s show and you're like, that's not for me, these comics won't change your mind. But I must go catch up on all the Ewoks material leading up to this epic crossover, which I think is pretty much all the comics and stuff before the actual show. So we'll get into that next time. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening for my thoughts on the Droids TV show and the Droids comics. And there's a couple more, but those just dive into the movies, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, that's all, guys. Thanks for chilling around, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.